Yeah, today we are going to talk about the role of the center, what Derrida very pertinently discussed about it. The structure of the binary opposition and the fact that one side of a binary only has a proper meaning in relation to the other side, to its opposite, means that every system posits a center, a place from which the whole system comes and which regulates the system. The center, as we know it, holds the whole structure in a place, keeping each of the binary opposites on its proper side of slash. It cannot change its position. If you look into Western philosophy, Western philosophy has great collection of terms that serves as centers to various metaphysical systems. Various centers you will find out. Systems like metaphysical systems like being, that is one of the center, essence, or you can say substance, truth, form, consciousness, even human being, God, unconsciousness, all these different metaphysical systems that we find it available in the Western philosophy. Now Derrida tells us that each of the terms, each of these terms which I right now mentioned, all these terms designating a center serves two purposes. One, it's the thing that is given credit for creating the system, because it is this thing which has created the system. So it is the credit given to that particular term that it has created a system, number one. And number two, the power originated in it. The power which is originated in that center. And this power guarantees that all the units are operating under a particular rule. All the units follow particular rule. And it is also something which is beyond the system, which is not governed by rules of the system itself, because the rules are applicable for that particular system. There is something which is beyond this system, which is not ruled by any of the regulations of this system. Now, if you see in Derrida's conception of a structure, the center holds all the units in one place. and in a very proper relation to each other. The center keeps the whole structure from moving very much. It holds. Now, Derrida calls all these motions, Derrida calls this kinds of motion as play, P-L-A-Y. What is play in Derridian concept? That a structure, a conception of structure, if you say the center holds all the units in place and in proper relation to each other, the center keeps the structure from moving very much, which is called as play. The center limits the play of the structure because it is the center which decides, and making it stable and rigid. If you look at human being itself, in a family, one person, when it was a joint family, the elder person or the person who is a person who is you can say senior most in the family. Some in Indian context, you can say grandfather, dada. He used to control the whole family. He used to decide what to move, how to move, and everything he's controlling by himself. And this center holds everything. This center decides movement because it makes a stable and rigid. It makes the structure stable and rigid. In a human body, if you see, mind is the center. It controls everything. And if mind controls everything, your body is stable and rigid. If it decides it will not control, then your mind is somewhere. Your body is not reacting properly. You might think of building a structure. A center shaft. It holds all the wings and floors of the building. This center shaft's capacity decides how much the structure, how much limit that structure should get if you see the construction of the building. Because the center shaft decides how much the building will go on, how much this building will carry a capacity. It is very much limiting because it knows how to make it stable. This shaft, if it is proper, then it will be comfortable in hurricane or in any volcano, in any storm, in any difficult condition. In a building, the lack of play is good. In building, lack of play is good. If you are constructing a building, lack of play is good. What is play? Once again, I'll repeat it. Don't get confused it with anything else. The center holds all the units in place and in proper relation to each other. The center keeps the structure from moving very much. Derrida calls this as a play. So in architecture, in structure of a building, or if you see any building, you will find out the lack of play is good. But in a philosophy or in philosophical system or in a signifying system, you say, Derrida say it's not good. In philosophy, this is not good. Imagine for a moment a kindergarten classroom. The teacher is in the center. When the teacher, whether he or she is there, the children behave. They act as the way the center dictates them. As the teacher said, they behave accordingly. And when the teacher leaves the room, the children go crazy. The children play wildly. Whatever they do, what they want. Center holds everything. In an examination, the invigilator is in the center. If the invigilator is there, you will the students who are giving examination, they keep quiet. As soon as the invigilator gets out of the room, you know what will be the situation. So, friends, all structures and systems, including language, operate between two poles. Absolute fixity, rigidity, no motion, no play, and its opposite. And to its opposite, complete movement, constant shifting, continual play. These are the two poles. One is absolute fixity, rigidity, no motion, no play. And the second pole, opposite to it, is complete movement, constant shifting, continual play. Now, Western system, Western culture, and Western philosophy always favors rigid systems over shifting systems. Western philosophy, Western culture favor rigid systems over shifting systems, as it favors order over chaos, predictability over unpredictability, stability over shakiness. In linguistic terms, Western philosophy likes a single solid connection of signification. Western philosophy, in the linguistic term, needs or likes a single solid connection of signification. What is signification? One signifier connected to one signified. Better than ambiguity or multiplicity of the meaning. Because if there is a multiplicity of the meaning, then we have seen that one signifier may have more than one signified, or vice versa, you can say. However, this is a very important exception. Derrida's play is precisely what makes literary language, and especially poetic language, possible, since a single word can have more than one meaning. Please understand, Derrida's play is precisely what makes literary language, especially poetic language, possible, because a single word have more than one meaning. This is where we can begin to see how these ideas about language and structure apply to literature. What we call literary are texts within which language tends to operate loosely, with lots of play. And non-literary text, by contrast, use the language as if the meaning were fixed and stable. Non-literary texts such as newspapers, if you see very carefully, news articles, they use language as if the meaning of that particular language is fixed and stable. For example, if you take a word called wrench, W-R-E-N-C-H, in a poem, you can puzzle over the dimensions of the meaning of the word. You can play with the various dimensions of the word wrench. But in non-literary use, wrench is a plumbing material, plumbing in a plumbing manual, because every manual, every machine gives you manual, and in manual it is a plumbing in a plumbing manual. You can't play various meanings of wrench. It has got one particular meaning. If you are taking hammer, if you're using hammer in poem, it may get various meanings of hammers. But if you get it plumbing manual, then hammer is having one meaning, fixed meaning, stable meaning. You cannot change it. Derrida says that the center is the most important part of any structure. It's point where you can't substitute anything. At the center, only the unit, that is the center, can be there. None of the other units of system can take place of that center. No one can take place of center. You say, if I want to replace the center, you cannot replace the center. You cannot change the center. Center will remain the same because of the center, the whole structure depends on. So you cannot remove it, you cannot change it. It is something like a laws of thermodynamics in chemistry. For a philosophical or a metaphysical system, for understanding, for the sake of understanding, I am saying this. If you look at the early American Puritan culture, this Puritan system of belief, God was the center of everything in this Puritan system. God was at the center of everything. Anything that happened in the world, any event or unit of the system, anything happens in this world, it could be referred back to the God as its central cause of the event. It is referred back to the God. Everything that is happening, it is simply because of God. It is a very common thing in our Indian mentality also. It is because of the God everything is happening. God is the central cause of every event. And nothing in this system was equivalent to the God. You cannot replace the God. God at the center as the cause of all the things. Now, if you refer back to Sasur's idea that units within a system form a relation of exchange, that he said. But of a system is something that has no equivalent value. You cannot change it. Can you change God and replace anyone instead of him? Nothing can replace it. The center of a system is something that has no equivalent value. You don't have anything else which is having the same value of the center. Nothing can replace it or be exchanged for it. You cannot exchange even. It is the cause and the ultimate referent for everything in the system. It is the only thing that is referred by. Everyone refer to that particular system. Everyone looks at that particular system. You cannot replace it. You cannot change it. The center limits play and guarantees full presence. The center limits the play and guarantees full presence, because once you understand that it is limited, who limits it? Center. That means center has shown his presence there. Now Derrida also refers to the center as a transcendental signified. Please understand what Derrida is referring. Derrida is referring to the center as transcendental signified. Please remember this word. As ultimate source of meaning, that which paired with any and every signifier. You can pair it with any signifier. This transcendental signified creates a relation of signification, which makes a sign able to say something. This transcendental signified creates a relation of signification. Signification, signifier, and signified. And because of which the sign can able to say something, you can find out something out of that particular sign. Because as I said, the center cannot be replaced by any other unit in the system, nor it can be represented. Anybody or nobody can able to represent the center. It cannot become paired with just one particular signifier. Please understand this. It cannot be linked with one particular signifier. If you're not able to understand anything, please refer back to the God, the idea of God. Can you replace it? Can you change it? In some religion, God is represented. In some religions, God is not represented by anyone else. God is not represented in pictures or in words in some religions. In some religions, it is presented. The transcendental signified, which is a center. Why center is important? Because center transcendental is a, Derrida calls it as, refers it as a transcendental signified as the ultimate source of meaning, which is paired with any and every signifier. It is paired with any signifier, creates a relation of signification. Because it creates a relation with signification, you can able to find out the sign, meaning for that sign. That's why the center cannot be replaced by any other system, or the center cannot be represented by any other unit. It cannot be paired with one particular signifier because it can have shifts, because you have seen from the study we are talking that points out deference, trace, deference, and supplement. The three terms, please remember again. Now, because of this process, Derrida says the center is a weird part of any system. Weird part of any system. It's part of the structure, but not part of it. It is part of structure, but it is not part of it because it is creating and governing element. It is creating and it is governing. As Derrida says, the center is the part of structure which escapes structurality. Escapes structurality. Please understand this. Why it escapes structurality? Because it is creating and governing element. Again, if you look at the Puritan example of God, God creates the world and rules it, and is responsible for it, but he is not part of it. Is he part of this world? No, God is not part of this. The center, if you see very carefully, my friends, the center is thus paradoxically both within the structure and outside the structure. The center is the center, but not part of what Derrida calls the totality. It is not part of the totality. That is structure. It is not part of that structure. So the center is not the center in that case. You may say, sir, we are getting confused. You are again saying part of it, not part of it, center and part not center. What exactly it is? If you see very carefully, again, for sake of understanding, I'm giving the example of God. It will be we can easily understand it. We can easily recognize it as soon as possible. God creates the world. That means He is the center. And He is responsible for everything that happens in the world. Yes, because He is managing the system. But He is part of it? No, because he's somewhere else. He's somewhere, some different place. He is the center. But is He in the center? No, he's at some different place. Everything is revolved around him, but he's not in that center as literal meaning of the word center. That's why I said the center is the center, but not part of the center. Derrida, according to Derrida, this is what he calls it as contradictorily coherent. The concept of centered structure. Why it is contradictorily coherent? Because there is a contradiction. Although it is in center, but it is not in the center. It is contradictorily coherent. Are you getting it? Are you understanding it? In this essay, in his essay, Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences, which Derrida originally read in at a conference on structuralism at Johns Hopkins University in 1966. And there Derrida announces that perhaps some event or rupture has occurred. The rupture, the another word we heard. The rupture he refers to is what he sees a major shift in the fundamental structure of Western philosophy. A fundamental shift in Western philosophy. For this he is referring as a rupture. This break is the moment when structuralism enabled philosophy to think about itself differently. Structuralism has changed the whole idea. With structuralism, it became possible to think about the structurality of the structure. Earlier, we are not looking at structurality of any structure. If you see carefully, my friends, an analogy might be, if you paraphrase Plato, to think about being in a room. At first, when you are staying in the room, you think that how to decorate a room, how you decorate that room. For decorating the room, what posters to put up on the walls, where the bed goes, how the chair is, and where you place the chair and where you place the table, everything that goes on. And then one day you might think about your room, not as your room, but as one room in the whole building. Building as a part of the whole structure, building as a whole structure. Your room is one amongst them. Your room is not different than others. Then what happens? Then you might think about the roomness of your room. Then you start to think that how affection, closeness that you have with the roomness. The qualities that make it a room. It is not only four wall and one door and one window. It is not that structure only. You realize that how this structure is converted into a room, how a structure of house is converted into home. House is a structure, home is an emotional feeling. You realize that your room is your room, not because of your specific decorations, but because it is not the room to the next door. It is not because of the room to the next door. It is your room because it is yours. Now, the moment When you begin thinking about roomness of your room, roomness of your room is the event. Derrida calls it. What it is? It is event. When you started to think about roomness of your room, when you started to think about homely feeling of your house, Derrida is talking about event. He calls it as an event. The moment when philosophers were able to see their philosophical systems not as absolute truth, but as system constructs structure. When philosophers were able to see that their philosophical system is not absolute truth, it is structure, it is a kind of structure they are talking about. This is rupture. Prior to this rupture, or break, you can say, according to Derrida, the history of Western philosophy was continual substitution of one centered system for another centered system. It's continually shifting from one centered system to another centered system. As you will find out, a rational human mind replaces the God. The rational human mind later on refuses God. Then the unconscious mind replaced the rational mind. And you will find out we started to change it in that direction. So on and so forth, the replacement started to take place. Structuralism made it possible to see that the center was a construct, not the truth. The center was construct. It is not just a truth. And to understand the center's function in providing the full presence in the system. What is the role of center in this full system? You will realize it. Given that Western thought has always utilized the central system, if you start to replace one center for another, Western philosophy started to replace one center from another with substitution. Derrida wonders how we can think about it and talk about it, systems are and centers, without creating a new system with a new center. How it is going to be replace it? If you don't create a new center, a new system, how you are going to replace that centered system? Derrida has wondered about all those things that happened in Western philosophy. He mentions Nietzsche, Freud, and Heidegger as examples of thinkers who tried to build centerless system. These are the thinkers who tried to build centerless system, but they failed and concluded that it is important, concluded that it is impossible to speak outside the system. In other words, my friends, you can't talk about any system of thought without using the terms of that system. You cannot use. There is no outside as such. Or in Derrida's word, if you say, we have no language no syntax, and no lexicons, which is foreign to a system. System knows everything. System knows every syntax, system know every lexicon, system know every language. These things are not unknown to system. We can pronounce not a single destructive proposition which has not already had slip into the form. Everything is converted into one particular form. The logic and then the implicit postulations, what it seeks to contest, everything is been constructed. And that's why you cannot say that you are replacing the center. You have to construct it. And this is the rupture in Western philosophy with the idea of center that Derrida has given. Now, his example is to think about the concept of sign. As soon as you try to say something like all signs are equal, that there is no transcendental signified that holds a complete semiotic system together, or that the signifying system have no centers and therefore all signs have infinite play or infinite ranges of meaning. You have to note that the only way you can even talk about signs is by using the word sign. You cannot replace it. You have to assume that it has some fixed and stable meaning. You cannot say I'll replace sign without knowing the sign. You cannot replace the sign. And then you are back in the system that you are trying to deconstruct. This is another reason why Derrida's works and those of other post-structuralist thinkers are so difficult to read and understand. That's why it's really difficult to understand the post-structuralist thinkers most of the time. That's why I said in earlier lectures also, post-structuralism is not complete if you don't understand deconstruction very properly. These post-structuralist thinkers were to write in a way that constantly reminds the reader that meaning is unstable and that makes us aware of the constructed system which makes the text possible. Then you will have a question, sir. So, what exactly is deconstruction then? If you're saying so much about it, because right from 4 days we are talking about deconstruction, then what exactly it is? Logocentrism, phonocentrism? And if you say that Derrida says it's a strategy for reading, then what does all this about philosophical systems and centers have to do with reading of literature then? What this has to do? What is its role? Now, according to a literary theorist, Barbara Johnson, deconstruction is a careful teasing out of warring forces of signification with the text itself. It is teasing out, it is constantly teasing. You tease someone. It is teasing out varying forces of signification within the text itself. A deconstructive reading analyzes the specificity of the text, of the text's critical difference from itself. Every text is having its own. The text, there is no text in it, we used to say. In simple words, if you want to understand in simple words, deconstruction reads a text. Deconstruction reads a text. Deconstruction reads a text to see where it posits its own center. This is the simple thing that we can understand about deconstruction. Deconstruction is, you can say, a way to read the text to see where it posits its own center, how it constructs its own system of truth and meaning, and then looks to see where it contradicts itself. Friends, every text, like every philosophical system before Derrida's rupture, creates its own world within its own terms and premises. Like a philosophical system, some idea or concept serves as center to hold the whole structure together. Now, the basic idea of deconstruction is to find that center and see what happens to the structure if you take it away. The function of the center is to limit play, to hold concepts. Concepts such as good and evil, which are in a firm relation with each other. You cannot remove it. So that we know what each is and what side of the slash it should be on. We know it. Deconstruction is a way of reading that looks for places where the structure gets shaken up, where the structure gets shaken up, where more play, more ambiguity of meaning, where it occurs, where the binary opposites do not stay neatly on their proper side of slash. That is what a deconstruction is. In the essay of Derrida, Structure, Sign and Play, Derrida describes his initial discovery of deconstruction. When he is reading Claude Lévi-Strauss's very famous essay called The Elementary Structure of Kinship. Now, in this book, Lévi-Strauss says that the basic structure of myth, and it talks about all the aspects of culture, that is binary pair or opposites, which has always stand in negation to each other, they negate to each other, absence. In looking at the dichotomy of nature and culture, Levi-Strauss argues that nature is that which is universal and culture is that which is dictated by norms of a particular social organization. That is what Levi-Strauss wrote. The following the grammar of his structure. Then nature always has universal aspect. Nature means universal, and absolutely opposite of it, separate from, you can say, culture and specific. Now here Derrida uncovers what he calls scandal. Remember, I am telling you today various terms. First, we understand what is meant by center, how center is not, how can center replaced, what is the rupture, then I talked about. Then I told you what exactly it means by deconstruction. Now I'm talking about a scandal. Scandal is the basic concept of deconstructive reading. Please understand this. It is the basic concept of deconstructive reading. Though Levi-Strauss has set up a system where the terms nature and culture have meaning because they are opposite. They are on the other side of the slash. His text also discusses the incest prohibition, that law says that who can have sex with whom, who can create a relationship with whom. The incest prohibition is also universal. Every culture has one particular prohibition. It is also specific that every culture works out the rules for its institution on its own way. Here's something that is both universal and specific, both nature and culture. How can that be? This discovery that I just told shakes up the whole Levi-Strauss system. When the two terms refuse to stay on their proper sides of the slash, the whole order of the structure gets rattled. If they don't pay attention to remain on the sides of slash, everything is going to be disturbed. A system based on binary opposites depends on all binaries having the same stable structure, such as good is to bad, or light is to dark, or up is to down, or right is to left. If anyone in this pair starts to refuse or starts to slide around and refuse its position is in absolute opposition to its partner, then all the terms start sliding. And pretty soon the whole stable structure will collapse into pieces. When this happens, you can no longer define one term as opposite of another. Light is what which is not dark. But if light and dark are no longer opposites, then what do this term means by? If good is not what evil is, or good is not what bad is, if they are not opposite to each other, then what this term means by them? Deconstruction argues that all systems, all texts have these moments or places where their structure gets shaken and where their formerly solid elements get put into the play. Sometimes this happens, deconstruction says, deconstruction argues, either in a text or at certain moment or at certain places when the structure is getting shaken and where the formerly solid elements which put the structure into the play, they are also getting shaken. Those are the places where text's definite meaning breaks down, where multiplicity, ambiguity, rather than clarity and logic, it takes over the text. A deconstructive reading thus reads a text against itself. That's what from yesterday I'm saying. Text is against itself. How the text is against itself? At one moment, the meaning starts to get shaken. And you'll find out multiplicity and ambiguity takes over. And when this takes over, the text read against itself. A deconstructive reading looking for the holes, looking for the shaky parts of the system, looking for the parts of the system of which the staple meaning of the text tries to set up. You're looking at those shaky meanings, shaky parts of the system, of stable meanings that text tries to set up. Once you deconstruct a system by pointing out its inconsistencies, by showing that what happens when the center fails to hold all the elements in a fixed position, or where the slash dissolves and binaries starts to collapse into each other. Derrida says you have two choices at that time. You can throw out the whole structure and try to build another with no inconsistencies, with no play. But Derrida even further tells that it is impossible to do this. That just trying to substitute one center for another and not seeing that the center, the transcendental signified, is just a concept which has play just like another, and not having any fixed and eternal truth. You have to look at these choices. If you look at these choices, you can able to find out the meaning of that particular text. I hope that we are able to understand what exactly is the role of the center and how this center plays a very crucial role in making Derrida to understand how the deconstruction reading takes place. I hope that I'm quite simple in explaining the things. Let us continue this thing tomorrow.